Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Nora Moraga-Lui and I will be the moderator for this session. We'll be discussing human rights-based and conflict-sensitive approaches to forest monitoring and management. Our presenters today will share insights and upcoming projects in the context of Myanmar and Indonesia. As many of you know, today's webinar is co-hosted by the National Forest Monitoring Team of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations Forestry Division and the Forest Interest Group of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. The Environmental Peacebuilding Association is today represented by members working for financial cooperation projects supported by the German government in Indonesia and presenting research supported by UK aid in Myanmar, respectively. FAO has been supporting more than 60 countries, including Myanmar, in their development of robust national forest monitoring systems and assessments, with the goal of developing reliable forest resource information for application in creating national forest policies, planning, and sustainable development. Natural resources, including those related to forests, can be some of a country's most critical assets for peacebuilding, and in most contexts are necessarily intertwined with human rights. We've convened this webinar in order to exchange knowledge and hopefully scale up action around the use of human rights-based approaches and conflict sensitivity, including gender dimensions in forest monitoring and management. We hope that today's transnational conversation with participants likely from all over the world will generate ideas and help to enlarge the network of professionals interested and involved in these topics. So before I get started with introductions of our presenters, I'd like to mention some logistical notes. First, I'd like to confirm that today's webinar will be held in English. We will keep participants updated if follow-up materials are produced in other languages. Now, the plan for today's webinar is to start out with opening comments from 3 esteemed guests. Then we will hear presentations from 3 technical experts. And following these presentations, we will hold a discussion. We hope that all of you webinar participants, as well as the presenters, will submit questions via Zoom's Q&A feature at the bottom of your application interface. We have additional experts behind the scenes as well, who will do their best to answer your questions. And we, of course, will aim to pursue follow-up communications if we're unable to address all questions during today's session. Now, it is my pleasure to briefly introduce today's opening speakers and presenters. We are lucky to be hearing remarks from Ms. Rika Lato, Ambassador and Head of Mission of the Embassy of Finland in Yangon, Myanmar. Our second opening remarks will come from Dr. Nini Kyaw, who is Director General of Myanmar's Forest Department. And following this, we are honored to be hearing from Mr. Yuli Prasetyo Nugroho, who is Head of the Subdirectorate for Recognition of Customary Forests and Protection of Local Wisdom at the Indonesian Ministry of Environment and Forestry. Later today, we'll be hearing presentations from Mr. Marco Piazza, who is a forestry officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization's Forestry Division. And the second presenter will be Mr. Bernd Unger, who works in Sumatra and Sulawesi as a consultant for the Indonesian Ministry of Forestry through the AHT Group. Mr. Unger is also co-chair of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association's Forest Interest Group. Today's third presentation will be made by Ms. Yana Naoyoks, who has a background in gender and peacebuilding and has been country director of Myanmar for International Alert since 2018. And finally, stay tuned for closing remarks from Carl Bruck, the president of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. Now, without further ado, and following these many introductions, I would like to welcome Ambassador Lato to share some remarks. I think we're connecting.
Yes, thank you very much. It is really a pleasure for me to be able to participate in this webinar and also give some opening remarks. I suppose I was invited because Finland is supporting FAO in Myanmar in implementing the project, the name of which is a human rights-based approach to national forest inventory and national forest monitoring and information system. Finland is doing that as part of our development cooperation in Myanmar and our development cooperation overall is human rights based. Well, I do know that the FAO has also been working on human rights based approaches for quite some time. Overall, I happened to be the permanent representative of Finland to the FAO about 10 years ago. And at that time, the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests was being prepared. It was later approved, and it is very much human rights based as far as I can see. Now, why is a human rights and conflict sensitive approach in Myanmar necessary? I want to recount some steps that we took to come to the stage where the project now is being implemented or starting to be implemented. Well, Myanmar, for those of you who are not that familiar, is a country which has experienced 70 years of civil war. So it's very much a conflict-affected country. It's also a country with vast natural resources, but unfortunately, they also fuel conflict in the sense that conflict is, among other reasons, about the control of natural resources. And also the conflicting parties in Myanmar get income from the sale of natural resources. And in Myanmar, also the size of illegal and illicit trade is very high. About a third of the country is conflict affected. There's regular fighting, and there are more than 20 conflicting parties. So it's also a very complex conflict situation in the country. A major part of the forest area in the country, furthermore, coincides with the location of the conflict areas, because both of the areas are the more remote areas in Myanmar. Myanmar started opening up after being a closed society for a few decades in 2012. And a lot of development partners started entering the country at that time. Conflict sensitivity, which is very much linked to human rights, especially when it comes to people living in conflict areas, was not adequately addressed in some of the projects which were started at that time. There are numerous examples of projects which at worst could have perpetuated conflict. Therefore, when we started developing the cooperation in the forest sector with Myanmar, this was something to be seriously addressed. And it has taken quite some time actually to come up to the stage where the project is actually starting. The planning process has been lengthy, but at the same time, while it has been lengthy, we hope that it can provide an example for similar situations or somewhat similar situation in other parts of the world. And I assume that this webinar also can help in doing that. It can really work as an example of what can be done in such situations. What were the most critical elements then which were lacking in the first version of the project document? After the first version, there's been appraisal and there's been a separate conflict sensitivity analysis. And based on the findings of these two, alterations have been made in different aspects. But based on those also, one can say that, first of all, that the project is highly relevant and it's very much needed in the country for many purposes in order to prevent deforestation and forest degradation. So it is important for forest policies, for legislation, for management guidelines, for national and international reporting, for land use management, for rural development, and for environmental conservation. It is also relevant in order to protect indigenous land claims and rights. Originally, it was mainly planned for the former, which is for forest purposes, rather than protecting indigenous land claims and rights or indigenous rights altogether. But it could have a substantial impact potentially in all of the above, if data and results are shared broadly, including to key minority civil society and community stakeholders. At best, we think that the project can also contribute to better informed dialogue and confidence building between the government and the population. And it can also further better and more accountable governance, provided that data sharing and stakeholder participation are extensive enough. At worst, of course, and there have been examples in this country of other projects in other sectors which have failed in their conflict sensitivity approach. At worst, even this project could turn out to be a very expensive but weakly institutionalized effort with little change in the practices if conflict parties feel excluded from the decisions and benefits, thereby perpetuating ongoing violence. I just wanted to share these few thoughts, and these were the issues that we have been addressing and tackling in the past few years. And now, really, the project has started. It is ready to start, and we will be continuing monitoring these issues. And we really hope that this will be a project which can be an example used in various parts of the world as a very conflict-sensitive project in the forest sector. I stop here because I'm sure that you will hear more about the later decisions regarding the implementation of the project from others. But once more, very happy to be here to deliver opening remarks, and very interesting to hear the discussion that follows. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lato, for those introductory words. And exactly, we look forward to hearing about next steps and a bit more about the rationale of the project later today. Our next opening remarks have been pre-recorded in case of connectivity issues. So please join me in welcoming remarks from Dr. Nhi Kyo.
Mingalawa. Good morning to US. Good afternoon to Europe and Africa. Good evening to Asian colleagues. Excellency Ms. Rika Latu, Ambassador, Embassy of Finland, Honorable Representative from Indonesian government and FAO colleagues, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment Conservation, Myanmar, it is my great honor and pleasure to deliver opening remarks at the webinar on human rights-based and conflict-sensitive approaches from forestry cases from Myanmar and Indonesia. I would like to extend my warmest greetings to you all. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to explain briefly about the topographic conditions of our country. Our country is characterized by its central lowlands surrounded by highlands and mountains around the country, especially northern and eastern parts. The western and southern parts are coastal strips. Due to its diverse topography and climatic conditions, Myanmar's forests range from subalpine forests in the far north through extensive tropical deciduous forests and dry forests in central Myanmar to southern tropical rainforests and mangroves along coastal lines. According to Global Forest Resources Assessment 2020, about 42% of the country's total area is still covered with the forest. It is one of the highest forest cover countries in the Asia-Pacific region. However, Myanmar is the 7th highest deforested country in the world between 2010 and 2020, and forest degradation is also a major issue for various reasons on which you all are probably familiar with. In Myanmar, about 70% of the country's total population is living in the rural areas and heavily depending on forest resources for their livelihoods. There are more than 11 ethnic groups in Myanmar, and forest utilization patterns are different depending on nature of their traditions and locations. Therefore, due to the high diversity of people and landscapes, it is crucial to manage our forests for sustainability by integrated approaches. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, achieving sustainable development goal is the great challenge, especially for decision making and policy formulation. In order to ensure that we make the right decision at the right time for sustainability of natural forest resources in the long term, there is a necessity to be able to access good, reliable, and up-to-date forest-related data and information. Taking this opportunity, I would like to explain about what we are doing for forest inventory. Myanmar has a long tradition of conducting forest inventories, and it's among the first tropical countries in the world that had historically established sample-based large area forest inventories with strip sampling in the teak forest during 1850s. The first national scale forest inventory, NFI, with probability sampling approach was initiated in 1881 and supported by the UNDP FAO project, which is the first phase, which eventually was extended until 1992, which is the second phase. However, this national forest inventory was not completed due to various reasons. We have carried out district-level inventories for periodic management planning purposes, including the determination of annual logger cut (AAC) and development of stand and stock tables at the Forest Management Unit (FMU) level. District-level inventories were carried out in 40 districts out of 68 districts, covered 11 out of 15 states and regions of Myanmar during 2005 and 2017. For the remaining 28 districts, no full inventory data are available yet. Therefore, we are grateful to FAO and the Government of Finland for supporting us in the implementation of the project on Myanmar National Forest Inventory, National Forest Monitoring and Information System with a human rights-based approach, which respects human rights and don't aggravate existing conflicts. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, nowadays, new technologies are opening up incredible opportunities to collect and analyze forest-related data and information relevant to the planning and implementation of sustainable forest management, and also for monitoring and reporting processes. We hope that with the support of this project, we can find new, innovative, and inclusive ways of approaching forest inventory and wider forest monitoring tasks in our country. Our technical teams in the Forest Department are working together with the FAO NFI team to build into a design of implementing the National Forest Inventory within the framework of a human rights-based approach and conflict sensitivity at the various levels, from the planning to execution of the fieldwork. There will be inclusive training and capacity building, the analysis of data and multi-stakeholder supported interpretation of results, as well as developing data and reporting facilities and platforms with open access policy and open access data sharing agreement. We are also proud to know that with the approaches to be developed in Myanmar, we will contribute to develop products and exchange of experience at a global level so that other countries with similar challenges can benefit from our experience and we in turn also from theirs. During the webinar, we will learn more details of what are planning in the project, and I would like to ask presenters to give further detailed explanations. I hope you all have an interesting webinar and fruitful discussion. I would like to conclude my remark by expressing my sincere wish to you all to be in physical and spiritual well-being. keep safe from COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Director General for those words. Our next opening remarks are going to be from Mr. Yuli Prasetyo Nugroho. So please welcome him to close our opening remarks for today.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's very great pleasure for me with the most honorable panelists, audience, and participants. Indonesian government has been working to resolve forest land tenure conflict and improve policies to enhance the participation of communities in forest management. Such targets have been approached by structuring equitable land ownership and by managing forest resources in order to better catalyze the emergence of community-level economic activities, including through the launching of the national land reform, expanding social forestry program, and encourage corporations to partner with communities. Indonesia has also committed to promote sustainable forest resource management in order to prevent further deforestation and forest degradation, while concurrently enhancing sustainable economic growth in Indonesia. During Mr. Joko Widodo term of presidency, we have four principles. One is effort to improve environmental quality as means for achieving sustainable development. Secondly, utilization of forest resources to support national development on the basis of science, technology, and the circular economy. And the third is transforming forest communities into factor of production to promote livelihood and prosperity. Finally, is deliver of achievement the three of principle at the site level, and we have Pak Unger, Mr. Unger, and Pak Andiko and the others to help this principle and implementation the program. The Indonesian government in recent years has strengthened its commitment to prevent deforestation and degradation of forests, like implemented of system the certification of sustainable management of forests, which is also aimed at stopping illegal logging, implement a system of resolve conflict on land right and forest tenure communities in surrounding forest area, including adat communities on in international term is indigenous people, and we have a huge diversity ethnic and adat communities in Indonesia, and there's a sensitive sensitive issue in Indonesia is the conflict became sensitive in Indonesia because of diversity, but is our achievement to work together with all the people and friends and NGOs and GSO, community, civil society organization to have a collaboration with all aspects. Those have been achieved through a shifting from corporate-oriented approach to a more community-oriented approach in Indonesia. And Adat Forest and other social forestry scheme program is prioritized by President, and we have helpful from the President, Ministry, and we other friends to help about a conflict to implement that social forestry program. Social forestry is intended to provide communities with legal access to the forest. Community-based forest management paradigm ensure justice, democracy, transparency, anti-corruption, and community welfare. We must listening to the people aspiration. The government policies is pro-people forest and it's meant to reduce a conflict and creation of job through social forestry program. The Indonesian government has one map policy with this regulation. It tends to facilitate the resolution of conflict related to the land use and the accurate identification of border between regions throughout Indonesia, and we still make it better day by day to make updating about map, anything to minimize the conflict and really more resolution conflict, like many friends in Palu, in Jambi, Sumatra, and Sulawesi. And I sincerely appreciate your attention, and I hope we can share learning today. And thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you and, of course, to all of our opening speakers today for providing some very crucial context and for highlighting some of the key reasons that we are here discussing these topics. So to get us started with today's technical presentations, let's please welcome Mr. Marco Piazza, who will be telling us about FAO's forthcoming rights-based approach to their crucial forest monitoring efforts in Myanmar. And just as a quick reminder to all of our attendees here today, you are more than welcome to pose questions to the presenters via the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will hope to address these towards the end of the session. Marco?
Hello, you can see properly?
Yes, welcome, Marco.
Thank you. Hello to everyone. Thank you, Nora, for your introduction. So my name is Marco Piazza. I'm part of the team that is supporting the implementation of the project that gives the title to this presentation, that is National Forest Inventory and National Forest Monitoring and Information System with a human rights-based approach in Myanmar. I am also part of a global team within the Forestry division of FAO that has been working for several years on supporting countries to establish systems for monitoring their forest resources at the national level. So our work is carried out through data collection on the ground and satellite image interpretation, but our approach is by nature multi-purpose. So we've always been interested also in the human side, in the human dimension of forestry. So within our portfolio, this project, the one I'm about to present, is unique in the sense that for the first time, a specific emphasis is placed on conflict sensitivity and human rights-based approaches in the context of forest monitoring. So for this reason, we are really particularly excited to share a bit more details about our project and to expand our network of experts in the field. So the idea and the motivation for embarking in this type of project comes from the realization and the understanding that forest-related conflicts are increasing, are a global phenomenon, and have a direct impact on the forestry sector and on forest-dependent people. We know that in many cases, conflicts have a direct link to natural resources, and this is also intensified, as we know, by climate change challenges. So this understanding came to us as a technical team, but we are particularly grateful to the government of Finland, who has been very keen and supportive in developing a project that would specifically address and specifically apply HRBA and conflict sensitivity to forest monitoring. We now have enough evidence to know that forest-related conflicts can emerge in a variety of ways and are often linked to disputes on land tenure and benefit sharing, protected areas, access to resources, gender equity, ethnic minorities, and so on. And these thematics are now in the agenda of several development organizations at various levels. And we have seen also in recent months with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, how we have seen the importance of community-based approaches and how rural communities are the first ones who suffer, in particular where conflicts and disputes on natural resources are already existing. So the project is structured over a 5-year period, with the first 2 years dedicated to readiness and testing of approaches and methodologies, and the remaining 3 years for the full implementation. Key partners besides FAO are the government of Finland and the Myanmar Forestry Department, as well as a range of stakeholders who have been active in this field and have acquired knowledge both at the national and international level. The project has two key objectives. The first one is to develop a package of globally relevant approaches to NFI within the framework of HRBA and conflict sensitivity. And this is because we aim to capitalize on this experience in Myanmar. So we'd like to be able to transfer and apply the knowledge gained from this project to other countries with a similar situation. The second objective, of course, is a full-scale national forest inventory in Myanmar based on HRBA and do no harm strategies. And this will allow the government of Myanmar to have a sustainable and efficient system for monitoring the extent and the status of their forest resources. So the context in Myanmar is of a long and rather complex history. Communities have been affected to varying degrees by more than 60 years of tension and internal conflict. In this context, the forestry sector has also been directly impacted through the illicit exploitation of resources, and the physical and economical control of forest products has often been a source of tension and conflicts. An emblematic event is the situation in the Rakhine state and the displacement of several thousands of residents to neighboring Bangladesh. Throughout the country, it is estimated that about 1/3 of the villages are labeled as conflict affected, and a similar percentage of populated areas also host ethnic armed organizations. So the project was just recently launched, but we have already started to lay out the initial steps and the priorities. And I must add that we are not really starting from scratch, because some related and relevant work was already carried out in recent years under the UN RED national program in Myanmar. So for us, this constitutes a solid base to build on and to develop. Some of the first steps include the recruitment of a technical advisor for a human rights-based approach and conflict sensitivity to lead this component. And we will soon reopen a vacancy announcement on our website, so keep an eye on the FAO vacancy site for this opportunity. We will continue to develop a comprehensive stakeholder analysis and consultation with partners, as well as a communication strategy with the objective of as wide as possible involvement of stakeholders. We plan training and capacity building on HRBA, conflict sensitivity, and FPIC, and of course the implementation of the actual FPIC. And we'll also have a project grievance and redress mechanism. So in addition to these activities, when we have designed the sampling frame for the field data collection, we have looked at the number of information, including maps of restricted and conflict areas, and we developed a conflict-sensitive stratification. So these are two of the maps that we have analyzed to guide our stratification. On the left, you can see the townships that are indicated as being restricted areas, and on the right, you can see the distribution of the major ethnic groups in Myanmar. So the next step was to overlay these two maps with other maps, such as a land cover map, a landmine areas, a map of the areas that are under self-administration, and the result is what we call a conflict-sensitive stratification of land areas, or CSSL, which you can see on the right side. The map shows 3 strata indicated as levels. We have level 0 in yellow, where these are areas with no conflict. Level 1 in pink, areas where there is a slight potential for or a higher potential for conflict, and in level 2 in red are areas with a higher potential for conflict. So this will guide our approach of work in the field. As a result, here you can see the distribution of the NFI clusters by by the stratas of different levels of potential conflict. So you can see about 50% of the NFI clusters are in level 0 area, so no conflict expected. About 30% are in level 1, and about 20% of the plots of the clusters are in level 2 areas where there is a stronger potential for conflict and also security issues. Another activity that was done already was presenting the NFI approach to ethnic groups and NGOs in southern Myanmar, and more specifically to the Karen forest representatives. So we arranged for sharing prior information to local forest departments and authorities of the ethnic groups, as well as NGOs, CSOs, and we proceeded with handing over all the relevant information on the NFI work. This includes plot locations, methodology, expected outputs, capacity building efforts, and training plans. And so in general, we have received a very positive and enthusiastic response at the local level. However, it is likely that further contacts with the ethnic groups will have to occur under the mediation of the central government. We are also aware that changes can happen quickly on the ground, so we need to have a contingency plans and stand ready to modify our approach as needed. For example, in terms of the spatial planning, the CSSL levels, which may need to be refined after consultations with local and regional stakeholders.
Marco, just so you know, we have about a minute left.
Yep, I have one slide left. In conclusion, the current status of the project is fully operational, with project team almost completed. We have already been in the field. We started to do data collection with piloting and training activities in level 0, of course. And the next field campaign is scheduled for early 2021. We already had a very good experience and collaboration with Environmental Peace Association and International Alert. I'd like to thank them for joining us, and we look forward to more exchange. And in the same spirit, we welcome contacts and collaboration with other organizations that have gathered experience in these themes, particularly in the forestry sector, and particularly in Myanmar. So in really conclusion, we strongly believe in this project, and it was also highlighted by Ambassador Latu. We are committed to capitalize this experience for the benefit of Myanmar, but also other countries with similar situations. And we also believe that this project constitutes an important contribution to environmental peace building in the context of forest resources monitoring. With this, I thank you for your attention and look forward to hearing the next presentation and the following discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marco, for that presentation. And we do look forward to discussing ways to get involved in the question and answer session. So our next presenter is going to be Mr. Bernd Unger, who will talk about approaches to addressing forest and land conflicts with case studies from Indonesia. Bernd's presentation has also been pre-recorded and just in case of connectivity issues, but he is with us live and can help to answer questions now and later in Q&A. So Bernd, welcome.
Thank you, Nora, for the introduction. So as said, we will now move from Myanmar to Indonesia, and I'm very pleased that I have the opportunity to share our experiences with the approaches we use in forest and land conflicts in 2 provinces in Indonesia. Indonesia, a country of 7,000 islands, almost as big as Europe, here with the capital of Jakarta with the sign of a star. And now we will focus for the next 10 minutes on the province of Jambi, where Forest Program 2 is, and on the Central Sulawesi, you can find Forest Program 3, both government-to-government projects co-funded by the Indonesian and the German government and implemented by the Indonesian government. The overall objective of the 2 projects are the conservation and rehabilitation of forests and livelihood enhancement. The initial situation, if it comes to entrepreneurial conflicts, is that we have many reasons and many conflicts related to forestry. So the reasons, here I've listed a couple of reasons, but it's not limited to these reasons, are first of all unclear boundaries. So we have unclear boundaries of villages, of national parks, of protection forests, and others. We have traditional and we have in-migrating people. We have traditional rights and regulations which are not in line with the government rights and regulations. We have conflicts between communities and enterprises. We have a different understanding, different stances, different interests, different needs. And on top, especially in Jambi province in Sumatra, we have human-wildlife conflicts. For the facilitation of conflicts, we have identified 3 bottlenecks, which are time, funds, and human resources. The first approach I like to focus on is an approach we call the classic approach. We train village facilitators, they become paralegal, and they go to the villages and they facilitate the conflicts. They always start with a free and prior and informed consent, the EnPax approach. And for the methods, the focus is always on participation, so that all conflict parties become subject and are not object of the conflict facilitation. We strengthen local knowledge and sensitivity on peace building. We are creating understanding that conflicts are an opportunity of change. And the methods depend on the situation and the character of the conflict. We always do the conflict assessment. We do follow a one map policy, which is important for the visualization of the conflict. We use conflict trees. We have a stakeholder matrix, and so on. The overall aim of the facilitation is a joint agreement among all conflict parties, and in this agreement, the conflict parties usually also agree on joint activities to strengthen the collaboration. So now there is one point which is innovative. It is a common approach in conflict management, but not yet so common in general conflict facilitation in Indonesia. And this is the supervision and coaching clinic. So what is it, supervision and coaching clinic? What is so specific? It is a supervision and coaching clinic for the village facilitators or for the paralegals. So they have a backup. They have trainers which from time to time can be consulted and which give them advice and which help them to facilitate the conflict. So this supervision or this coaching clinic is usually done as a group event. So the facilitators, the paralegals are together from each other. And if needed, as you can see on the right picture, there's also individual training for facilitators. So while doing this, the facilitators are sharing ideas, they're sharing best and best practices. They see the similarities of the conflicts. They share the experience of used methods. They're starting to become to getting creative about new ideas and methods, and sometimes they also see that they have certain aspects of the conflicts have not yet been considered, and this is all addressed in this coaching. So by doing so, the supervisors managed to facilitate up to 20 conflicts in parallel in a duration of a 2-day event. The second approach we call Lotus approach. Here you see the innovation is at the beginning. The rest is it's in principle the same as the classic approach, but here we have the innovation in the beginning. The innovation here is that we don't have facilitators facilitating the conflict, but the conflict parties are trained and they facilitate their own conflict. Here on the right hand, you see Mr. Andreas. He's the head of the customary community of Toro village in Sigi district, and he was one of the participants, and he was trained to facilitate his own conflict with the national park. So in this training, the national park and the customary community of Toro village came together. So what is the characteristic of the Lotus approach? It is very often the first time that the conflict parties coming together and talking about their own conflict. The conflict parties are guided by trainers, but they independently work on their own actual conflict case. So they're leaving the event with a concrete work plan and with a common understanding of the situation. The conflict parties are learning together the theory, but they're also doing role plays and they practice, or for example, they do the mapping together, they do stakeholder analysis together of the methodologic approach of alternative conflict resolution. All these strengthen the local knowledge and it creates ownership among the conflict parties. So in this case, we can highlight that the local people get a voice. Among all the conflict parties, this Lotus approach creates a mutual and a common understanding. And in our experience, this approach can be used, very well used, for a landscape approach and for human-wildlife conflict. So in the context of the project in Jambi, the project intends to establish elephant wildlife corridor, and all villages bordering to this corridor have participated in this training, and now they managed to have one map for the whole corridor, and all aspects are considered in this mapping exercise, but also during the facilitation of this conflict. So here we have managed, with the Lotus approach, we managed to have 7 conflicts guided in parallel in an event of 3 days. So coming to the conclusion and recommendations, we can say that both approaches strengthen local capacities and knowledge, which is important for the sustainability. Both approaches are efficient and effective. Both are addressing the identified bottlenecks, so time, funds, and human resources. Both approaches consider human rights and conflict sensitivity. And now I'd like to draw your attention on a conference planned for February 2022 in Geneva, Switzerland. And this is the 2nd international conference on environmental peacebuilding organized by the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward for a fruitful discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bernd. And we're glad that you're with us live in case people have questions about your work and your team's work. So finally, let's please welcome Jana Naujoks. She will be discussing research findings about the importance of considering gender dimensions of forest management and peace building. So we look forward to hearing. Thank you, Jana.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you to the FAO and EnPax for the opportunity to present today some of our findings. A warm hello from Yangon. I'm excited to be here to share some of our key findings and recommendations from a recent publication on women's participation in forest management in conflict-affected Karen areas. This was a research collaboration between International Alert and our partner Kola Foundation. We are both organizations focused on supporting inclusive peace and sustainable development processes. The research was enabled by funding from UK Aid through the Peace Research Partnership. And you can find the full research report, as well as a smaller summary and a handy fact sheet on our website, both in Burmese and in English. Trying to see. Yes, there we go. And my colleagues, I think, will be sharing the links to the reports in the actual chat there as well. Good. So this research focused on the Karen areas of Myanmar in the southeast here on the border with Thailand, where there have been many decades of violent conflict, significantly reduced recently by the signature of the nationwide ceasefire agreement, but not yet a political settlement has been found. We looked especially at the mixed control areas, so those areas where there is contested control between the government and the different ethnic armed organizations and non-state armed actors in the area, around Tang U and around Pa'an. In terms of the methodology, we conducted succession of participatory consultations that were a little bit of a hybrid between focus group discussion and part training, where we sought to both map participants' own experiences and perceptions, but also build their understanding of core gender concepts related to the topic of forest management and forest use. And I want to start by looking at the question, why is women's participation in forestry important? And the first answer to that is that it's women's right to participate in decision-making that affect their lives and their security. The international level, this has been guaranteed by the different policy frameworks from Sustainable Development Goal number 5 to CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination Against Discrimination Against Women, United Nations Security Council Resolutions 1325 on women, peace and security. And within Myanmar, that's been confirmed by the NESPAW, the National Strategic Plan for the Advancement of Women. But in addition, there's also a very strong business case for women's participation in a meaningful way. The international evidence is clear. When women participate meaningfully in a peace process, it actually increases the chances of achieving a peace agreement successfully, and if they're involved in the implementation, for this to be implemented successfully without breaking down. And this lends itself to the argument that it's also very important for women to be meaningfully involved in conflict resolution efforts at the local level to increase the likelihood of this leading to successful solutions. It makes a lot of common sense. If you leave out 50% of the population, you're missing out on a lot of perspectives and views that could support finding creative solutions and implementing these successfully. That's a lot of support for potential new solutions, especially where women and more diverse stakeholders can raise a range of issues that may otherwise be overlooked in the initial discussions if you only have a very narrow range of armed actors participating. And in all conflict-affected areas, like in the Karen areas, there's a risk that any project intervention, whether it's related to development, conservation, forest management, there's a risk it may unintentionally exacerbate some of the conflict divisions and negative dynamics, increase mistrust, and potentially also increase gender inequalities and discrimination where these are already in the local communities. So it's really important to take a do no harm approach, paying attention to conflict sensitivity and gender sensitivity in the design and in the implementation. So now I'd like to turn to the findings of our report, and very broadly, the research identified some broad similarities and differences between men and women's involvement in forest use and forest management. While men and women share a range of tasks related to collecting firewood, cutting trees for constructions, monitoring illegal logging, working in community forestry and agroforestry, men's tasks tended to be described as being harder and requiring greater strength, while women's tasks were seen more as the lighter and more easier tasks, collecting leaves and lighter branches rather than logging the big trees, collecting fruits. At the same time, women were a lot more likely to be engaged at the community level, especially on a voluntary basis, whereas men were more likely to be participating in any paid roles or in the decision-making positions in the forest administrations, both on the government side as well as on the Karen National Union side. So overall, we had a broad trend of women putting in large amounts of effort and time on voluntary activities, participation and awareness raising sessions at the community level, but then men-dominated decision-making. This is a bit of a replication of some of the gender dynamics at the household level or in the community level. This is due to several types of barriers that women face when participating in forest management. And I'd like to take you through a few of these barriers, as well as making already clear recommendations, of very practical recommendations for how these barriers could be overcome. So in this area, there's been a long history of conflict and insecurity, which has really reduced the mobility of women. Women often need the approval from their families or communities to attend trainings, to participate in activities, and especially to leave their villages or to go to overnight sessions, overnight trainings requiring a night spent away. In the context of history with sexual violence and unsafe road, these are very severe. So it's essential that venues are accessible for women in a safe way, that the safe transport can be arranged or reimbursed, and to minimize where possible the requirement on women to spend a night away from their homes and from their families. Or if it's essential they participate in multiple day training or activities, trips that take longer, then it's really important to make clear arrangements for their safety and ensure that these are communicated to their families and communities, including to the husbands, to the mother-in-laws, or to the parents directly. Then most women in caravan areas already face significant workloads, and they face the traditional responsibilities of childcare and domestic responsibilities, all the unpaid care work of the house. But in addition, they often contribute economically, financially to the economic income of the household and to the family survival. So that's already a lot of demands on their time. So when practically you're arranging activities, trainings, events, it's really important to consider women's daily schedules when they can participate, making sure that activities are child-friendly or make childcare provisions, and ensuring that where it's not possible for women to participate because of their other duties, that volunteers are identified from those that participate to cascade back information to those that couldn't join directly. This can really help to multiply the impact. And I think this quote really speaks for itself. This is what a woman member of a community forestry initiative that we spoke to in Pa'an was shared with us. So she said, "My voice is heard in these trainings and workshops, but when I go back to my village, I have no voice. Nobody wants to listen to a woman." And I think this is a really clear example of some of the social barriers, social norms that form barriers to women's participation in areas where the traditional socio-cultural norms see men in leadership responsibilities, both in the household and in the community, whereas women are often seen as the followers and not accepted in decision-making roles. There has been some changes, and this is changing a little bit, and it was in flux during the conflict violence. But broadly, women are not easily accepted as decision makers, with some very notable exceptions. And again, there's some very practical things that projects can do to address that. You can make sure how you design communication and outreach, including training materials. How do you portray women in these? Is it mainly as mothers or as victims or as passive beneficiaries? Or do you also show them in leadership and decision-making roles? Look at your teams on the field. Is it all male teams doing trainings, or can women participate and deliver some of these trainings? Where you have male trainers, how do they engage with women participants? Do they listen seriously to the concerns raised, or do they belittle and joke when women raise concerns? So the role model function there can be really important. From the activities themselves can be really make sure you involve both men and women together in any joint follow-up activities. And when you're thinking about the invitations, how to mobilize community members, common practice is to ask administrators to nominate community members to join. If these always invite the same ones, it kind of creates barriers for maybe younger ones or other participants to join. So think about making requirements such as nominating both women and men or different generations to participate in the activities, so that a more diverse cross-section of participants can join. And last but not least, it's really important to look at doing no harm in these very conflict-affected areas with a long history of violence and a long history of gender discrimination, where promotion of gender equality, including through the activities I've described, could potentially lead to a backlash risk. It could be that women may experience a backlash at the household or at the community level through gossip, through public criticism, or through increased domestic violence. So it's really important to also communicate why it's important that women participate in this to the husbands, to the fathers, either by involving them directly in trainings or by facilitating separate sessions for them. And key to that is building broader understanding for why it's beneficial for both the communities as well as the project that women participate meaningfully. And part of that could be working with the women to make sure they have their negotiating strategies right, that they know how to deal with concerns and develop coping strategies for any potential backlash that they feel able to discuss and call for help. And in areas where there is a history of sexual violence or gender-based violence, it's also really important that any trainers, field staff have to be able to recognize where women have potentially been the victim of domestic violence or sexual violence, that they know they don't need to deal with this, but they should know who to refer women to if they come to them with any issues, if they have suspicions. And of course, it's vital that all staff is trained in principles of preventing sexual exploitation and abuse, and any zero tolerance policies towards harassment that your organizations would have in place, I assume. Good. This brings me to the end of my session. So I hope these practical tips have been useful, and I look forward to continuing the discussion and handing back to Nora now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jana, and to all of our wonderful presenters here today. We are now going to be able to pivot to our question and answer session and discussion. So thank you to all of the attendees who have been submitting questions throughout today's session. You've seen that some of our technical experts in the background have been answering those throughout, but we will do our best to also have a bit of a broader discussion about some of these questions. So I appreciate you all bearing with me as I try to translate these for our diverse panelists here today. I think we'd like to start out with a question that sort of summarizes a few comments that we've seen from participants today about dynamics involving agribusiness or business interests in the sort of context of the conflicts that are described. Basically, I was hoping that some of our presenters could provide examples from their experience for involving actors representing agribusiness or business interests in the efforts that they've described, and if they have any ideas or tips that could potentially be scaled elsewhere. So I don't know who might want to start, but I do think that Bernd might have some relevant comments from his experience.
Thank you, Nora. This was not my focus, so this is why I didn't address this topic. But of course, economy is very often a driving factor for conflicts on natural resources. So if we can manage, if we can improve the market access for the local people selling products, this is definitely one of an important strategy to minimize the risk of conflicts. So in our case, in Indonesia, the products are mainly bought by local traders. So they're going to the villages and they are buying the products, and then it avoids that people have to have long journeys to the markets in the cities. But it is definitely a challenge to link the product of the local farmers to the national or even to the international market. But a very important topic to address. Thank you, Nora.
Sure. And as a quick follow-up, Bernd, what kinds of stakeholders then, just following up to this question, are usually present at the sessions that you all facilitate? Are there representatives from potentially agribusiness or other related interests, or are they all local primarily?
In the session I presented, the traders or the local businessmen are not only, in our case, they were not presented. They would only be presented if they would be part of the conflict. But good point. So maybe we should try to involve them as well in the next session. So that's a good point.
Thank you, Bernd. Does anyone else care to comment on this broad question before we move on? Not seeing any unmuted microphones. So I'm going to go ahead and relay another question from our audience today, which is specifically about the case of Myanmar, but I wonder perhaps we'd hear some insights from Indonesia as well. Can you all explain a bit about the political commitment from local institutions and government in the projects that you have presented? And again, maybe even to broaden this question, in addition to local institutions and government, what has your experience been in identifying and engaging local partners to ensure the success of your work? So perhaps we can start with the teams from representing projects in Myanmar. Marco, can you begin?
I can share a couple of thoughts, and maybe Franz can integrate if he wishes. So, I mentioned during the presentation a first attempt, a first testing of involving local communities and the current forest administration people, and the response from them was positive and enthusiastic. And even before this project, in national forest monitoring projects in other countries, we always had the local involvement as one part of the methodology, right? So we always go where we have plots, there's always the step of involving the local forestry administration or the local communities, the village chief or whoever is in charge of that piece of land. Here, of course, in Myanmar, the challenges is much higher because there are some, as was said by a number of people here, there are areas which are either restricted or there are security issues in terms of landmines, active conflict. So the context is much more challenging for us. In the past, in the situation of, for example, landmines, from a technical point of view, was appropriate and maybe easier to just buffer out a certain areas. In this case, the idea is to try to go beyond that and trying to have a real involvement with the local population. We also have a backing from the forestry department. They have been very, they are part of the project. And just to conclude, this is the very beginning of the project. So we have some ideas. We welcome suggestions. We will have experts on board. But we would like to take this opportunity to the fullest to be able to do it now and to replicate it in the future. This is my comment.
Yeah. Great, thank you so much, Marco. And if anyone else from FAO wants to jump in at some point, feel free, but I think now we'll hear from Jana.
Yes, thank you for the question. So different components to this question. In terms of working with local partners, this is really important to our approach. So we work very closely in partnership with local civil society organizations from different sides of the conflict, different areas at the national level and at the local community level. And would very much let them lead on engagement with identifying the stakeholders that are important at the local level, to then, for example, engage in research consultations, interviews, or in locally focused dialogues between multiple stakeholders. We've been more focused at the subnational level in our activities lately, but have also previously found a lot of constructive commitments from government side on various issues for engagement, including on conflict sensitivity and the forest law enforcement governance and trade mechanism discussions for the interim task force. So while there's a lot of really good efforts started, including with the national land use policy, I think land laws are very core to issues of forest access as well, and community access, especially for indigenous communities. We've also seen that some of these processes take a very long time, whether that's related to formalizing access for indigenous communities, especially in conflict areas, to land and therefore to their forests, or whether it's some of the movement of the peace process, or whether it's discussions with actually implementing and kind of finalizing a draft law on preventing of violence against women, which has been discussed since 2014 now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bernd or anyone from the project in Indonesia, would you care to comment on engaging government partners or local partners, which can be different or the same?
Yes. In our case, so the two approaches I presented are in fact developed and the events were organized and at least co-facilitated by the Indonesian government. So in this case, by the Social Forestry and Environmental Partnership Authority in Sumatra in Sulawesi. And on the local level, so the village heads and the head of the sub-districts, and so they are, we try to involve them as much as possible in our processes. In the case of the Lotus approach, if they're not identified as a conflict party, then they are not invited. But we had invited local authorities for natural protection. We had private enterprises joining, and so manifold actually, and so in fact it was organized by the government. Yeah, all these events.
Great, thank you. And I want to make sure that there were no other comments from either of the other teams. I still don't see any microphones unmuted. So thank you so much for your responses to that question. I'm seeing a couple of technical questions for Bernd about the classic approach that was mentioned. So there was a question, who have you found to make an effective sort of facilitator or paralegal in the classic approach? And then a bit more of a general question for any of these approaches, how do you get conflicting parties to meet in the first place? Do you have any insights on how you engage those actors?
I was just going to answer this the first question by writing, but now I skipped this. According to our experience, we cannot really say that it is more effective to use younger people, elderly people, women, men. It depends more on the individual skills of the trained facilitators. It is definitely useful to have a mix and to have maybe a co-moderation or facilitation, so that it's not only one who is going to the village, but at least two. That always helps the facilitation in the villages. For the identification, yeah, we do a pre-assessment and we do the FPIC approach in the villages before we invite people to join the events. So for the Lotus approach, it is us who goes to the villages first, and we talk to the people and we identify the key players directly in the villages, and from the government. In one case, it was the National Park Authority, so it was very clear who is the second representative of the second conflict party. It was the representative of the national park. In the other case, with the elephant corridor, the one I presented from Jambi, there it was more heterogene. So as I said, there were people from different authorities and from private enterprises and village representatives. And they appointed the people themselves, the villagers. So they said, well, it is the head of the village, or it is the head of the forest management unit representing, or anyone else who is a key person in the village.
Thank you, understood. So I have one question for Jana before we start thinking about scaling up and maybe measuring success. So Jana, for you and your team, there's a question from the audience that is, which of the barriers that you found and presented a bit of information on have you found some of the greatest resistance to? And then conversely, what are some areas that it seems that your counterparts or people that you've worked with are very open to addressing? So what's easiest and maybe most challenging?
These are good questions, and I can give some broad answers, but it can also be very different locally. I think a topic that is often quite challenging is promoting women's leadership and participation in decision making. So women stepping up to the front of the room, sitting in the first row, speaking in a culture where women have often been raised to be quiet and to not be loud. So then becoming loud on behalf of the community or for issues that matter to them. This can cause a bit of backlash, especially gossip, or like I said, the spending nights away can bring a lot of allegations of character slurs. In terms of issues that are more open, I think what we've seen is really broad-based support for conservation activities and this idea of conserving the forest, the natural environment, which is of great kind of social cultural importance to many of the ethnic groups, especially the Karen, but also the idea of protecting this for the next generation, so being the conservers of the forest and the natural environment from one generation to the next. I think that's something that is seen as a very credible and legitimate role for women to play.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. So Jana was just talking about some broad trends and then of course acknowledged that there may be some differences locally. So on a similar note, I have a question for Bernd. The question is, do you think that the presented methods have worked well because the situations between Sumatra and Sulawesi might be somewhat similar? Or in other words, do you think that the methods, especially the Lotus method, could be applied in other countries or contexts, cultural contexts?
Well, if you see the size of Indonesia and a little bit of background, you see the different cultures of this country and the local tribes and all the different local languages. And so we cannot really say that the situation in Sulawesi and in Sumatra is the same. And the approach went very well or functions very well in both societies. So, well, it is a new approach. We have elaborated this, and so we have tried it successfully. And I'm looking forward to hear whether any one of you has made similar experiences, or if anyone would be keen trying this in another society. And then I would like to have background or feedback. From you whether this approach also functions in different countries. But I'm actually convinced that it will work, and it will also work outside of land and forestry conflicts. I'm pretty convinced. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So definitely a lot of room for reflection and maybe future collaboration. On a sort of similar note of collaboration, I know that the FAO team's going to be very soon continuing to engage and looking to engage stakeholders and collaborators for their work in Myanmar on this new human rights-based approach. I was wondering if anyone from that team cared to comment on the best ways to maybe stay in touch, learn more about this project, and get involved at some point in the near future. I don't know if anyone has any comments. All right. Well, I do know that a lot of resources have been shared in the chat, and I see Marco is ready now to respond. Great.
Yeah, well, just trying to rephrase your question, meaning to stay in touch from the general public to follow more about our work. Was that the question?
Or even how interested stakeholders, if we have any audience members here who are curious to hear about the timeline for engaging and potentially collaborating on your project.
At various levels, from an individual level, our emails, FAO Forestry Division in a National Forest Monitoring Team, that's entry points. Of course, the most obvious is the Forestry Department in Myanmar. They are fully on our side. So those are the official routes. We also started to use it depends on what type of information, but like even social media or web pages, we will have a portal for our project. So it depends on the level of the type of engagement, but we always advertise quite widely what we do. Probably the most institutional is the Forestry Department, of course, as a contact point of Myanmar, I meant.
Excellent, understood. Thank you. We also, I guess there have been a couple of questions looking at what success might actually mean in the context of maybe many of these projects, but not to get ahead of ourselves here. I was curious to know, Marco, from your team's side, besides the sort of core objectives of your initiative, are there other measures of success that you all are looking for? And then I guess similarly in the other contexts, this could be a very obvious question, but there might also be some hidden markers of success for the work that you all do.
Yeah, I'll just share one comment. I think to me personally, seeing the ownership of the national ownership and the institutionalization of the process, to me, is always a result, is a sign of success. In some cases, projects like in our context, they remain labeled as a FAO project or a UNDP project or other organizations. So instead, if there is a very strong ownership from the government, in which we already have great signs for that, to me, that's already a measure of success. That's one aspect, and then the other aspect is we will see how many of those critical areas. I think there was a question in the chat right now. We know that will be challenging, and we could just use remote sensing methodologies and do visual, satellite image interpretation, and so not even have to put our feet on the ground. But that's not the step number one. That would be in case there is all other fails. So again, so the percentage of the plots that we will be able to visit in those critical conditions would be also a measure of the success. I don't know if Franz maybe wants to elaborate on that. Otherwise,
I was answering questions in the Q&A, so I don't know what you were discussing right now. So, what was the question again?
The question was on how would we measure success of in our project, and there was an open question to all of the participants.
How we would measure success in what sense?
Maybe that's part of the question as well. And if you want to reflect.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, the success is that the thing is that you may have heard this in the presentation or in the opening speech of the Director General of the Forest Department. There has never been a fully national scale forest inventory in Myanmar. So they had some experience before, 30 years before, but they didn't really, for many reasons, could not finish this and generate data useful for national level forest planning and what is needed then in the context of a wider approach, multi-purpose approaches for national forest management. So the success, the measurement of success here would be that we really establish the first national scale forest inventory for Myanmar with all the features and all the aspects which is needed for this purpose, which is also inclusive of all those areas where in the former inventory, or in the former national forest attempts to national forest inventory was not possible to go in there, or for other reasons they haven't been able to finish this. So we want with this project really establish a truly national scale forest inventory and generate data for the national government, but also for regional governments, for ethnic areas. There is in Myanmar, there are some of the ethnic groups, of the major groups, they have their own forest administration, they have their own forestry personnel. So the idea is that when we generate reports and provide data, so that they can use them also for their specific forest policy and forest management purposes, not just only for the central government in Naypyidaw. So that in the end we achieve a national inventory with data, with reporting features and platforms to access those data also in an open, in an inclusive and equitable manner. So that means we not only something, as I said, for decision makers in Naypyidaw, but also for those out there in the regions, and especially in those regions where major ethnic groups are active. And those are incidentally also the areas where most of the good forests are still lying there. So that's they are on, let's say they have especially a high interest in knowing about the quality type of forest they have, options for management and so forth. And if we can achieve this, then we will have really a successful national forest inventory in Myanmar.
Thank you so much, Franz, for taking that broad question and really making it more concrete around those objectives that you all mentioned. Before we pivot to closing remarks, I wanted to make sure if any of the other groups wanted to comment on measuring success. And if not, I will go ahead. Bernd, yes.
Yes, maybe one comment from my side, not so much on the overall objectives of the project, but more focusing on conflict. So the success is are the joint activities. It is not the joint agreement, but it's a joint activity. So the joint agreement is of course also important, but it's in our eyes more one of the steps to reach the peace between the conflict parties. And the joint activities are the proof that there is really a collaboration of the conflict parties, which is usually local people and forest management units or national park or enterprises and so on. And if they conduct collaborative activities, then there's really a common understanding of each other and support giving to the other side, and then it's really then we can really say, okay, this is now a peaceful situation and it is a success. If it's only on paper, I would not yet claim it as a success.
Understood. Thank you. And I think we have a lot more conversations to have about what that peace actually looks like, what that means, about how inclusive the processes are and the outcomes are. We just heard about gender as one lens, and we've heard that all teams have considered sort of the situation with like ethnic minorities as well. But I know that there are many more discussions that we can be having. So I really do want to be respectful of the time of our attendees and our panelists today. And I'd like to quickly introduce our closing remarks speaker, who is Carl Bruck. And Carl is the president of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association and director of international programs at the Environmental Law Institute. So Carl, would you like to close us out today?
Thank you, Nora, and thank you all for a very rich discussion. This is a really exciting event, in part because we have a really important topic and we have some useful solutions, useful approaches. We see forest conflicts are increasing. These are diverse among community, commercial, human-wildlife conflict, different levels. A lot of these conflicts are linked to land tenure and benefit sharing. We also see forests as an opportunity for peace building, especially in conflict-affected areas. One of the really exciting things about today's event is that we are moving from problems to solutions. There have been so many discussions about forest conflicts. Today, forest conflicts are the context, but we're really looking at solutions. There have been a number of practical approaches to improve, in an integrated manner, to improve forest management, livelihoods, conflict management, and human rights all together. And to do so in a gender-sensitive way. Central to this is collaboration as a way to scale up collective action. As Yulia noted, we must listen to the people. And there's been an increased focus on engagement of communities as partners in co-design, to inform, in implementation. I'd like to highlight just a few approaches that I see as critical. I'm not going to repeat what you've heard, but I think the staffing is important. The analysis and consultations are really important. And I think it's important to note here, we're not talking just about conflict analysis. I think that's important, or forest resources. It's also stakeholders and gender dynamics. Capacity building is also critically important. We see this around human rights, around conflict sensitivity, around FPIC, around conflict resolution. And there were some very innovative approaches, including the Lotus approach that Bernd outlined, that merit further consideration in scaling up. And I think the other thing that people are not always used to is this question of adjustment. Often we develop our projects, and then we go about and implement them. And it's hard to adjust. In fragile and conflict-affected situations, this is essential. And so the monitoring, the contingency plans, and the anticipated ability to adjust is central. And this is also important to managing unintended consequences that we might see starting to arise and to prevent that harm. I wanted to highlight also a point that was made. Do no harm is central here, but there are more opportunities than just do no harm. There's win-win. I think that, we want to start from do no harm, but we want to see where we can create win-wins that not only do not exacerbate the situation, but actually build peace and prosperity. We also saw in very concrete ways why gender-sensitive approaches are important and work to build these, to pursue these multiple objectives. I wanted to close my remarks by observing that there's a broader context. We're seeing some very exciting tools in Myanmar and Indonesia, but there's also a broader approach to conflict sensitivity that is emerging. International Alert has done a lot of work on this. A lot of other organizations have been pioneering approaches over the last couple decades, couple years. It's really recent, I should say. The thing that I think is so interesting is that there seems to be a movement among people working on natural resources to recognize that if we want to achieve our environmental or natural resource goals, we have to do so in a conflict sensitive way. This isn't changing our mandate. It does require extra effort, but it's an effort that is invested in the outcomes. And I say this because we just completed a report with the Global Environment Facility on conflict sensitive approaches in the GEF portfolio. And the GEF is one of the larger funders on natural resource management and environment, but it doesn't necessarily have a framework. But they found time and again, when working in fragile and conflict affected situations, that conflict sensitivity is important to achieving the environmental objectives. With that, I'd like to thank the panelists very much for their rich discussion. Appreciate the solutions that have been presented, and thank the participants also for engaging in the questions and the dialogue. Nora, would you like to close for us?
Yes, thank you so much, Carl. And of course, to everyone else, as you just mentioned, all I want to say, besides thank you, is that there will be a recording posted of today's session, and the materials from the presenters will also be shared with those who are registered in the next couple of days. Besides that, thank you so much for your patience during the question and answer. And if we haven't gotten to your question and answer, please do be on the lookout for follow-up communications. Thank you so much to everyone who's made this event happen.